I wasn't looking for signs. That's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. You don't go hunting for it, not at first. You trust. You believe. You get used to the comfort of routine, the quiet predictability of love that's been around long enough to feel like furniture, always there, sturdy, unexamined. Until something shifts just a few inches off center. And suddenly it won't stop tilting. For me, it wasn't a flirty text, a lipstick-stained collar, or even the telltale whiff of unfamiliar cologne. No, it started with a document. A printed, neatly stapled marketing proposal, ordinary paper, ordinary font, found at the bottom of my wife's tote bag. It was the kind of thing she used to leave all over the house without a second thought. I wouldn't have even looked at it if I hadn't been digging for my phone charger after a 3-day work trip to Chicago. My own bag was still zipped shut by the door. Liv wasn't home yet. She'd texted me earlier that her team had a late brainstorm session and not to wait up. I didn't think twice. We'd been married almost 7 years. I knew she was dedicated to her work. Late nights weren't uncommon, especially when she was chasing a big client. So I dug into her tote without much thought. There it was, clean white paper clipped together, her unmistakable scribbles in red pen lining the margins. At first, I smiled. Classic Liv, she edited everything, even her own notes. She had this way of making even a bullet point sound poetic. I'd watched her build campaigns from nothing but a headline and pure caffeine. But then I looked at the header. E. Harper. No title, no agency logo. Just a name I didn't recognize. I almost didn't care, honestly, I didn't. Not until my eyes landed on the phrase in the third paragraph. Impressions don't create loyalty. Emotion does. I stopped cold. That was Liv's line. Her golden rule. She'd said it in every major pitch I'd ever heard her rehearse. Hell, I'd even teased her about trademarking it. That exact sentence with that exact cadence, it wasn't borrowed. It wasn't collaborative. It was hers. But the name at the top? Not hers. I kept reading. The rest of the proposal was her, too. Her voice echoed off the page, subtle and sharp in all the ways she crafted messaging to sound effortless. The way she used rhythm, short bursts of words followed by one long, persuasive sentence to pull the reader in. I knew that pattern. I'd listened to her speak it out loud on our back porch more times than I could count. It didn't make sense. Why would she write something like this and not sign it? When she got home, just before 11 p.m., I was sitting at the kitchen island, flipping through a mail catalog I didn't care about. She walked in like she hadn't just missed dinner, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and dropped her coat on the hook by the stairs. Tired? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Exhausted, she said with a breathy smile. We had to redo the whole layout on that eco-retail proposal. The client's a nightmare. I nodded, waiting a beat before saying, "Oh, found a proposal in your bag earlier. Thought it was yours, but it had someone else's name on it. Harper." She paused. Just long enough for me to notice. Then she smiled again, calm, unfazed. "Oh, right," she said, walking over to grab a glass of water. "That's a new strategy we're trying. Shared authorship. We're submitting all our high-level stuff under one name now. It's like a collective brand identity thing." She shrugged like it was obvious. Like I should have known. She wasn't nervous. She didn't stumble. If anything, she seemed prepared. That should have been reassuring. But it wasn't. Something about how smooth her answer was, how quickly she defused the question, made my stomach tighten. It felt rehearsed. I didn't push it. Just raised my eyebrows and said, "Interesting tactic." She nodded, leaning against the counter as she sipped from her glass. Clients don't care who wrote what as long as it sells. It's all about collaboration these days. And that was it. Conversation over. She moved on to talking about a restaurant her coworker had recommended for a team lunch. I listened, nodded in the right places, even laughed when she joked about the overpriced beet salad she didn't finish. But inside, a quiet unease had started to build, a weight pressing down, subtle but persistent. That night, lying next to her in bed, I stared at the ceiling long after she'd fallen asleep. I replayed the conversation again and again. I kept asking myself why it mattered. It was just a name, just a document. But that phrase, her phrase, stuck in my head like a song lyric you can't stop humming. Impressions don't create loyalty. Emotion does. I knew how she guarded that line. I'd seen her snap at a junior strategist once for rephrasing it in a pitch deck. She said it diluted the meaning. If I'm going to be known for something, she told me, it's going to be the truth behind those words. So why give it away? A few days later, I casually asked about E. Harper again. We were folding laundry, Netflix humming in the background. I mentioned how I thought it was clever but hadn't seen any internal memo about it. I figured she'd jump at the chance to explain it again, to show off her agency's new vision. But instead she said it's not formal. Just something we're trying. Keeps things anonymous. Less ego, more team. She didn't look up from the shirt she was folding. That was the moment it clicked. I'd known Liv long enough to recognize when she was proud of something. She couldn't shut up about the AI campaign she'd launched last quarter or the rebrand that landed them a deal with a regional grocery chain. She loved talking shop, especially when she had the upper hand. But this? She was brushing it aside. Quietly. Too quietly. It wasn't just a name. I didn't accuse her. I didn't ask questions that sounded like accusations. Instead, I nodded again and moved on. But in my head, things had already started rearranging themselves. I began to notice the gaps. The late nights that weren't new but had recently become more frequent. The way her phone suddenly had a password on it, a detail I'd ignored until now. The team calls she took in the bedroom with the door closed, the whispered laughter that stopped the second I walked by. The dinners she bailed on, saying she had a client call that couldn't be rescheduled. The way she smiled less when we watched shows we used to love, like she was just waiting for them to end. All those little things I'd filed under busy season or normal stress. But now? They all pointed somewhere. Somewhere I wasn't ready to go yet. Still, I told myself it could be nothing. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was overthinking. People change. Habits shift. Maybe we were just growing apart and didn't know how to talk about it. But that phrase kept echoing. Emotion creates loyalty. And suddenly I wasn't sure where her emotions were anymore. They say once a crack appears, you start to see all the other fractures that were already there. That was me. After the Harper thing, I couldn't stop noticing things I should have picked up on sooner. It was like someone had turned on a black light in a hotel room. You suddenly see all the stains that had been hiding in plain sight. The first one that hit me was her phone. Liv used to leave it around like it was no big deal on the kitchen counter, nightstand, even the bathroom sink. I'd see her scrolling recipes or doom-scrolling news, sometimes tossing it into the couch cushions without a second thought. But now? That thing was glued to her hand. Or her back pocket. Or her purse. Always face down, always locked. It didn't make a sound anymore either. No pings. No rings. Just quiet, suspicious silence. I only noticed because I reached for it by accident. Mine and hers are the same model and the lock screen was different. New wallpaper, new passcode. I asked her about it and she shrugged like it was nothing. Oh, you know. Work policy. Security updates. Liv had never cared about that kind of thing before. She once mocked her boss for demanding 2FA on their Slack accounts. Now she was suddenly the poster child for cybersecurity? Strike one. Then there was her schedule, once a predictable rhythm, now erratic. 3 late nights in a row, 4 back-to-back meetings, and a weekend where she supposedly had to go into the office because the client's app launch had a surprise delay. But she came home Sunday evening with a bruise just under her knee, a crescent-shaped shadow that looked like the kind of thing you get when you bump a table too hard. I noticed it while we were brushing our teeth. I said nothing at first, just stared. She caught me in the mirror, glanced down at her leg, and then shrugged. Oh, that? Stupid chair leg. You know how clumsy I am. She wasn't clumsy. Liv was the kind of person who could carry 4 lattes and a laptop in heels across a tile floor. But again, I let it go. Or I tried to. Until she came home one night smelling like whiskey. I drank occasionally. Liv doesn't. Never liked the taste, said it burned her throat and left her headachy for 2 days. So when she climbed into bed after another client dinner and I caught a whiff of something rich and familiar like good, expensive bourbon, I knew she wasn't just sipping soda water with lemon. You drink tonight? I asked casually, half turned on my side. She paused mid-undress. Oh yeah. 1 drink. The client insisted. I didn't want to be rude. Another new habit. And another excuse that sounded too neat. But the worst part wasn't the stories, it was the space growing between us. Not physical distance, but emotional. The space where all our routines used to live. She stopped laughing at the same dumb YouTube channels we used to quote in the kitchen. Stopped making pancakes on Sundays even though that had been our unspoken tradition since our first apartment. We used to linger in bed on weekend mornings, legs tangled, phones ignored. Now she got up early to run errands or prep for calls. We didn't fight. That's what made it worse. It wasn't some dramatic unraveling, it was subtle, quiet erosion. She didn't seem angry. She didn't even seem distracted. She just wasn't there. Not really. Her body went through the motions, but her attention felt like it was always somewhere else. With someone else. I started keeping track. It wasn't conscious at first. Just mental notes. Then, without meaning to, I began collecting timestamps, receipts, patterns. Her Uber charges started showing up more often on our shared account. Places she didn't mention. Oddly specific drop-offs at hotels or areas of town that didn't match her story about being at the office. I told myself it could all still be explainable. But that wasn't belief, it was hope wearing a mask. She got more careful too. Or maybe I just got more observant. One night I came home early, unexpectedly. I had planned to work late, but the network issue resolved faster than expected, and I figured I'd surprise her with takeout from that Thai place she loved. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but the porch light was on. I walked in quietly. The house smelled like perfume. Not hers. Not the soft floral stuff she used every morning. This was musky, heavier, not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. The kind that sticks to clothing and skin like static. I called her name. No answer. Eventually, she walked in from the backyard, wearing a hoodie I didn't recognize, phone in hand, slightly breathless. She froze when she saw me. "Hey," she said, almost too fast. "I thought you were working late." "Finished early," I said. "Thought I'd surprise you." She looked at the takeout bag and smiled. "You did?" "Sorry, I was on a call. Stepped outside for some air." "Who were you talking to?" "Just Emma from work." I nodded, but she turned her body slightly, tucking her phone into her hoodie pocket. I caught a glimpse of a lock screen notification as she did. It didn't say Emma. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. Her back was to me. She'd fallen asleep fast. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything I hadn't wanted to think about for weeks. There was a third person. I didn't have proof. Not yet. But everything was pointing toward the same conclusion. Liv was sharing pieces of herself with someone else. Maybe it was emotional. Maybe more. I didn't know. But I felt it in my gut. That ancient instinct in your bones that knows when something sacred has been breached. And here's the worst part. I started doubting myself. Was I being paranoid? Was I imagining it all? Was I becoming the kind of guy who checked his wife's phone, who counted Uber receipts, who tracked bruises and dinner wine? I hated that guy. I didn't want to become him. But I didn't want to be a fool either. So I said nothing. Did nothing. I started watching instead. Observing her habits. Her speech. Her tells. She'd always been a terrible liar. When she was young, her voice got higher, her eyes darted. But lately, she was calm. Too calm. That was more terrifying than anything. The lies were effortless now, like muscle memory. Like they'd been rehearsed, refined, perfected. One night, I tried to reach out. We were sitting on the couch, a half-watched movie playing, her feet tucked under her like always. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman I had built a life with slowly drifting away like fog on a morning lake. "Liv," I said quietly, "are you happy?" She blinked, taken off guard. "What? Are you happy with us? With this?" She looked down at her lap. "Of course I am. Why would you ask that?" "I don't know," I said, forcing a smile. "Just feels like we've been out of sync lately." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Work's just been crazy. Once this quarter wraps, things will feel normal again. You'll see." But I didn't see. I just felt the space widen. It was a Thursday when the truth finally stopped hiding. By then, I'd been walking a tightrope for weeks, balancing between gut instinct and the hopeful illusion that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. That I'd misread the signs. That Liv was just stressed, distracted, burned out from the grind of agency life. That she'd eventually snap out of whatever fog she was in and come back to me. To us. But deep down I knew. You can't unsee the subtle shifts. The distance in her eyes. The way she stopped asking me about my day. The way she turned down plans with a vague, "I've got a lot on my plate." That plate, I now suspected, included someone else. But suspicion is a poison you swallow slowly. It doesn't kill you right away, it just weakens your ability to believe in anything good. The truth came not by confrontation or discovery, but by coincidence. Or maybe fate just got tired of watching me pretend. My buddy Kevin, tech guy I've known since college, had picked up a freelance gig doing A/V installs for Liv's agency. We hadn't talked in a few months, but he texted me out of the blue that morning. "Hey man, your wife's agency booked us to set up some new stuff for a client presentation. You around this afternoon? Need a hand troubleshooting." I was off that day. Took some unused comp hours and figured I'd clean the garage, maybe fix the leaky kitchen tap. Instead, I told him sure, I'd swing by. No big deal. None of it felt suspicious. Not until I walked into the office. Her building was sleek, glass walls, open spaces, minimalist everything. I'd only been inside a few times, but I remembered the layout. Kevin met me in the lobby, badge-clipped and grinning. "Appreciate the help," he said, leading me upstairs. "The projector in Conference B is bugging out. We've been rerouting the display feed through the ceiling panels." As we turned the corner toward the conference wing, I saw it. Through the frosted divider of the top-floor conference room, Conference B, I saw her. Liv. She was standing just off-center in the room, near the long table, angled toward a man in a navy blazer. I didn't recognize him, but I didn't need to. Because the way he was touching her neck, soft, slow, familiar, it told me everything. She was laughing. Not politely. Genuinely. Her head tilted back slightly, the way it used to when I said something dumb but charming. The sound wasn't muffled by the glass. It rang out clear, like it belonged there. I froze. Kevin kept walking a few steps ahead before realizing I'd stopped. "Yo," he said, glancing over his shoulder. But I didn't answer. Inside the room, the man, tall, well-groomed, probably late 30s, reached for the wine bottle on the table. Poured her a glass like he'd done it before. A second glass sat there already, half full. White wine. Middle of the day. The presentation materials were still up on the screen behind them, some mock-ups, maybe ad comps. But the meeting was long over. This wasn't work. This was the in-between space people used when they stopped pretending. I didn't take a photo. Didn't record it. I didn't need to. That scene, my wife, smiling at someone else like she belonged to him, etched itself into my brain with terrifying clarity. She hadn't seen me. Or maybe she had and didn't care. That night, she came home late. I'd beaten her to it, taken the long way back, parked on a side street just to have a few minutes alone before walking into the life we still shared. I sat on the couch, TV off, light dim. She breezed in around 8:40, coat in hand, looking refreshed. Like she'd had a good day. "Sorry, long meeting ran over," she said, dropping her bag by the door. "The client's a talker." I didn't respond. She kicked off her shoes and headed toward the kitchen. "Did you eat yet? I could throw something together." I just stared at her, watching the performance unfold like a rerun. Same tone. Same rhythm. Same words she'd said dozens of times before, only now I could see the cracks in the veneer. Everything looked rehearsed. Everything felt wrong. She glanced at me, her smile faltering for half a second. "You okay?" I nodded. A single, hollow motion. Yeah. That was it. That was all I gave her. Because I wasn't going to beg for honesty. I wasn't going to hand her the opportunity to lie one more time. That night, lying beside her in bed, I didn't sleep. I watched the shadows move across the ceiling, listening to the sound of her breathing settle into that peaceful rhythm. I thought about the man in the blazer, about the way her body language had curved inward toward him, how easy it had looked. How natural. I'd spent months trying to preserve a version of her that didn't exist anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt gone. Like whatever tethered me to the life we had was finally cut. The next morning, she made coffee like nothing had happened. She offered me a mug and I took it. We sat in silence for a few minutes, each pretending to scroll our phones. She asked if I wanted eggs. I shook my head. She shrugged and started whisking. On the counter beside her sat her work bag. Same bag. Same tote from before. I walked over to the junk drawer and pulled out the proposal. The one with E. Harper typed at the top and her words bleeding off the page in that familiar cadence. I slid it onto the table and didn't say anything. She glanced over her shoulder, saw it, and froze for just a second. Her shoulders rose, fell, slowly. Then she turned the burner off and walked to the table. Picked up the document. Looked at it. No denial. No quick laugh. No explanation. She just set it down, met my eyes, and said, "I didn't want to hurt you." The most honest thing she'd said in weeks. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said it all. And in that silence, I realized the truth had been standing there for a while, I just hadn't had the courage to face it. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a life she'd already begged and living without me. The day after I saw them, Liv and the man in the navy blazer, I woke up with a strange, heavy calm pressing down on me. Not grief. Not anger. Just a sense of finality, like I had finally reached the end of a long, slow story I didn't realize I was in. She was still asleep beside me, one arm tucked under her head, breathing softly. I studied the curve of her shoulder, the strands of hair resting across her cheek. And I realized, I no longer recognized the woman lying next to me. Worse, I no longer trusted her. But I didn't wake her. I didn't scream or confront or demand she confess. I simply got out of bed, got dressed, and left the house without saying a word. I wasn't sure where I was going until I found myself in front of the tattoo studio I used to walk by on my way to work. I'd never stepped inside before. It always seemed like a place for someone else, someone bolder, wilder. But that morning I wasn't thinking about who I used to be. I was thinking about who I could no longer afford to be. The artist was young, friendly. He didn't ask many questions. Just nodded when I told him what I wanted and where. 10 minutes later, I walked out with a single word etched into the inside of my wrist. Enough. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't for revenge. It wasn't even a statement to live. It was for me. A quiet, personal boundary line. A reminder that my capacity for self-denial had run dry. When I got home, she was in the kitchen, hair pulled back in a messy bun, holding a coffee mug with both hands like nothing had changed. Like we hadn't just crossed a line neither of us would come back from. "You were out early," she said. "Yeah," I replied, brushing past her to grab water. "Had something I needed to do." She eyed my wrist, narrowing in on the bandage. "What's that?" I didn't answer right away. Just turned and met her gaze. "A decision." She blinked, clearly thrown off by the tone, but didn't push. Instead, she switched topics, something about a client meeting she had later and whether she should go with heels or flats. I didn't engage. Just nodded absently, then retreated to the living room. Everything about her felt artificial now. Her tone. Her movements. The way she poured cereal like she was acting in a commercial. I watched her closely, and all I could see was a woman trying to play a part she no longer believed in. That night, while she was in the shower, I placed the original E. Harper proposal on the dining table. No note. No confrontation. Just the evidence sitting there, quiet and undeniable. When she came out, hair wrapped in a towel, she paused mid-step the moment she saw it. Her eyes didn't widen. Her shoulders didn't tense. She just stared at it, frozen. I sat on the couch, watching. She picked it up, read the first few lines, and then slowly sat down. No words. No sigh of guilt. No defense. We stayed in that silence for several minutes. She finally said, "You kept this." I nodded. More silence. "I didn't know you'd notice." That hurt more than anything else. That somewhere along the way she'd started counting on my inattention. On my trust, not as love, but as a liability. As blindness. "I notice more than you think," I said quietly. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, but nothing came out. Eventually, she set the paper back down and walked away. And that silence? That told me everything. In the days that followed, something subtle shifted. She tried to reclaim normalcy, made dinner, commented on shows we were watching, even put on music while cleaning the house like she used to. But it all felt like theater. She wasn't reaching for connection, she was performing routine. And I let her. I didn't argue. I didn't confront. I watched. I listened. I gathered my strength quietly, like a soldier preparing for retreat. One night, we were watching a movie, something we'd both seen before, and she leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. It was automatic. Habit. But it didn't feel comforting anymore. It felt like a stranger's weight. My eyes drifted to the coffee table where the tattoo studio's receipts still sat, folded once, face down. She hadn't asked about it again. I hadn't offered anything. That's when I knew the marriage wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a set. A carefully arranged scene. A kitchen where nothing burned, but no one cooked. A bed that held two bodies, but only one truth. Later that week, I found myself driving out to the lake, just to be alone, to sit with everything. The sun was setting behind a layer of clouds, making the water look like it had been painted in shades of steel. I sat on the hood of my car, arms crossed, watching the breeze ripple across the surface. And I realized something I hadn't dared to think before. I was still mourning the version of her I had built in my head. Not the real Liv. Not the one who lied. Who hid things. Who gave someone else the laugh that used to be mine. But the version I'd held onto when everything started to slip. The woman who used to get up early just to brew my favorite coffee. The one who texted me terrible puns during meetings. Who once called me her anchor. That woman was gone. Maybe she'd been gone for a while. I drove back in silence. Didn't play music. Didn't call anyone. Just returned to the house we still shared, though now it felt more like a waiting room. A place we both lingered in, pretending the air wasn't full of unfinished exits. That night, I opened a new note on my phone and started writing a list. Not of things she had done wrong. Not of moments I could throw in her face later. A list of things I had let slide. A list of silences I had accepted. Of jokes that stopped making her laugh. Of times I felt lonely but chose to say nothing. Times I convinced myself this was just a phase. At the top of the list, I wrote, "This is not your fault. But it's not only hers either." And I stared at it for a long time. Because for the first time in all of this, I wasn't thinking about her. I was thinking about me. About how much of myself I had offered, hoping love alone would be enough to hold things together. About how long I'd spent trying to be easy to love instead of asking if I was being loved at all. And that's when it became clear. This wasn't about revenge. Or anger. Or exposure. This was about survival. About reclaiming the parts of myself I'd quietly given away. About walking out of the fire even if I still smelled of smoke. It was the beginning of the end. And maybe if I was honest, it was also the beginning of something else. I left a week later. Not forever. Not yet. Just enough to shift the atmosphere, to see if the air would change without me in it. I packed light. A duffel bag, 2 changes of clothes, my laptop, and the toothbrush I'd used for 6 years in the same cup next to hers. I didn't tell her where I was going. I didn't slam any doors or leave a dramatic note. I simply said I need some time and walked out. Liv didn't ask how long. She didn't cry. She didn't try to stop me at the door. But as I stood at the threshold of our house, the house, I realized she wasn't entirely surprised. It was almost like she'd been waiting for this moment too. I stayed at my cousin Darren's place. He offered the basement, unfinished, full of paint cans, a sagging couch, and the kind of cold that seeps into your bones at night. But it was quiet. And I needed quiet. The first message came that night. Hey, just making sure you're okay. I know you need space. I'm here when you're ready. I stared at the screen for a long time. Didn't reply. The next morning, she sent another. I'm sorry. For everything. I want to talk. I'll tell you the truth, no excuses. Please. Still, I said nothing. Over the next 3 days, my phone filled with a slow drip of texts, voicemails, and emails. Each one more raw than the last. She stopped pretending by day 4. I miss you. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't mean to lose us. Please just answer. Tell me if there's even a chance. One message had a photo of us from 2 years ago, her profile picture now on every messaging app. We were at a wedding, arms around each other, mid-laugh. The kind of smile you don't fake. It hurt to see. Not because I missed that moment, but because I knew now that somewhere along the line, that version of us had quietly vanished. Then, a shift. The next email was different. I changed the attribution on the project. It's under my name now. The agency knows it was my work. I'm not hiding anymore. She attached the revised pitch, same language, same layout, but this time it said L. Whitaker in bold across the top. I didn't know if it was a confession or a cleanup act. A day later, Kevin called me. Hey, he said, his voice low, careful. Didn't want to pry, but things are blowing up at Liv's office. I waited. She's off the Baxter campaign. HR got involved. Apparently, someone reported inappropriate conduct during work hours. Clients saw something. He didn't say it outright, but I could read between the lines. She okay? I asked. Kevin sighed. Honestly? Not really. People are talking. She's staying late trying to do damage control. I thanked him. Hung up. Then sat on the edge of the basement cot for a long time, staring at the concrete floor, wondering what part of me still wanted to protect her. Because despite everything, that reflex hadn't died. But I didn't reach out. Because even though she was unraveling, even though she'd finally started saying the things I used to ache to hear, it didn't change the weight of what she'd done. You can't unsay betrayal. You can't rewrite loyalty after you've handed it to someone else. On day 8, she drove to Darren's place. I saw her car from the basement window parked across the street like she wasn't sure if she should knock. She stayed in the car for 15 minutes. I never went up. Never peeked through the curtain. I just sat there watching her silhouette, her hand occasionally lifting to her face like she was crying. Eventually, she drove off. That night, I got a voicemail. Her voice was raw. Jacob, I don't know how to fix this. I'm not even sure if it can be fixed. But I need you to know I didn't fall out of love with you. I just lost myself. And I was stupid. God, I was so stupid. I hurt the only person who ever saw me. And now I don't know who I am without you. It was the closest she'd come to a real confession. And still, I didn't answer. Because what I wanted wasn't an apology. It wasn't changed names on pitch decks or public fallout. It wasn't even for her to hurt the way I had hurt. I just wanted peace. And that didn't live with her anymore. A few days later, my Aunt Darren's mom came downstairs with laundry. She paused when she saw me at the makeshift desk I'd created out of old boxes and a camp chair. You okay? She asked gently. I nodded. Getting there. She eyed my wrist where the edge of the tattoo peeked out from under my sleeve. That knew. I didn't answer, but she smiled like she understood anyway. I was married once, she said after a pause. Before Darren's dad. Didn't last. Thought I'd never recover. What changed? She shrugged. One day I realized I was living in a house where I was always the only one listening. And I thought, why am I the only one still trying? I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. That night, I replayed Liv's last message. Not out of hope. Just curiosity. Her words had stopped sounding like performances. They were messy now. Frayed. Human. But it was too late. The agency fallout got worse. Kevin told me she was suspended from 2 major accounts. A couple of long-standing clients had quietly pulled back. Internal whispers said the affair, though never officially named, had created trust issues. Still, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt removed. This wasn't my story anymore. It was hers to sit in, hers to explain. And for the first time, I didn't feel like fixing anything. I started jogging again, just around the neighborhood near Darren's. Nothing intense. Just enough to remind my legs they had purpose. I started sleeping better, eating better, reading. Not because I had to distract myself, but because I was no longer orbiting someone else's emotional needs. I had air. I had space. And silence? It stopped feeling heavy. It started feeling like home.